Hey parents. Okay, so it's a different setup today, but I wanted to be able to write on my whiteboard while I'm talking to you to make it more efficient and go by a little bit quicker instead of me trying to write with my mouse. So what I have presented to you right now is our parent letter for this week. This week we're starting lesson 3, which is about find volume using formulas. So just kind of so you can see the build up of where they started and where we're going. So they started in lesson 1, learning how to find volume by counting cubes. Because they learned that what volume is when I have a solid figure, and volume is the inside of that figure and how much space can fill the inside of that figure. So we started with these little unit cube block things. I would give them a rectangular figure that was made up out of cubes. They tore the figure apart. They could count the cubes, all those things. And so that was their first way to find volume. And then we moved on to their second way to find volume, which was to find out how many layers was in the rectangular figure. Then they figured out how many blocks were in each layer. And they learned that you could multiply those numbers, the layers times the blocks, and that will give you the total volume. Or say that I have a figure that has 4 layers in it, and each layer has 20 blocks. Then they figure out that you could do 4 times 20, like I just said, or they could use repeated addition and do 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20, and that would give them the total volume, 2, 4, 6, 8. That would be a volume of 80. Okay, so those were the first 2 ways that they learned how to find volume so far this year. Now, lesson 3, we're moving on to using formulas because this is a more efficient way to find volume. So, this week, there are going to be 2 ways that they learn how to find volume. The first formula is going to be volume equals length times width times height, which we kind of started with last week, but we didn't dive into it too much. And then the second formula that they're learning this week is where volume equals base. So the bottom of the figure, like that bottom layer, how many cubes are in there, times whatever the height is. Okay? So I'm going to go through this parent letter with you, kind of break it down a little bit and show you some examples of how I'll be teaching it to the kids. So on here it says, Dear family, this week your child is learning to find the volume of solid figures using a formula. So they will get figures that look like this, where you can still see the unit cubes, but they will also get figures that look like this, where you can no longer see the unit cubes, but it already has the dimensions labeled. So either way, they're learning to go ahead and label the dimensions themselves. So, for example, on this type of figure, they know that going across the front, I always draw this line, and I tell them, okay, the front, that longest edge is the length. How wide something is this side. And how tall something is from top to bottom, or from bottom to top, is always going to be their height. Okay, so that's how they would label it for this type of figure. For this type of figure, they're going to have to actually go on there and count the cubes. So they saw that today, and they've been doing that, but I draw this line because they kind of see where they should be counting, but they see that's 1, 2, 3, 4 faces where that length is. So that's how they know the length is 4. And they do the same with the width. They know that's how wide something is to the side. And they see 1, 2 cubes. So that's where that 2 comes from. Some students used to make the mistake of counting all of these that are this darker shade blue as the width, but they've learned that it's just these that touch this line that I just drew across the side. And then they know that from top to bottom, that's 1, 2, 3. So that's the height of 3. So those are 2 types of figures they will see. So what will be happening is they will be getting word problems that give them some kind of scenario. Today they had a shopping bag that it was talking about, and they would find these dimensions. Some of them are still using different ways that we taught in lesson 1 and lesson 2, but I'm slowly trying to get them to move on to these formulas that we're learning. So it says, using the model, you can find the volume of the gift bag by multiplying the numbers of cubes in each layer by the number of layers. They actually have been doing this, but they've not been given the name of what they're doing here. But they'll be given the name of that this week. And this is actually them using the formula where volume equals base times height. So all the base is the bottom layer right here that I'm coloring in red. It's how many cubes are there. It's the base of the figure is how I'll describe it to them. It's that bottom layer that is called the base. And you're multiplying however many cubes are in that base times the height, because however many cubes are in this bottom layer, well, there's also that many cubes in this middle layer. And there's also that many cubes in this top layer. So if I do the number of cubes here times whatever the height is, which is also telling me how many layers there are, then I'm figuring out how many cubes there are total, which is really what some of them have been doing all along since last week. They just didn't know they were using this formula. Okay. The reason we didn't go straight to formula again is because I wanted them to understand why they were doing what they were doing and what it meant. I didn't want them to just say, hey, let me multiply these numbers and get an answer. But I wanted them to understand where it was coming from. All right. So, for example, let me show you what they would do with this problem if they're using base times height. I'm going to erase some of this so it's not so crowded. Okay, and instead of using this figure where you can see the unit cubes, I'm going to move on to this one because this is what they'll start seeing, because now they should know that these cubes are being represented by these numbers. So they know this is the length, this is the width, this is the height, and I will be telling them this week to choose a formula to use. So if they're going to use base times height, all they have to do to find base is multiply the length times the width. So what that's going to give them is the area of what would fill in this bottom little square here that I'm coloring in. So they would know 4 times 2 is 8. So if I'm using base times height, I would do 8 times the height was 3. So this is the equation they would use. And 8 times 3 is 24. So they would know the total volume is 24 cubic inches. So that's one way they could solve it, is using base times height. The other formula that we'll be using, which this is probably the formula most of them will choose, is the one I said, volume equals length times width times height. They just haven't worked this step out to get the base first. They just kind of do it all at once. And so then they've learned to plug in the numbers. They know the length up here was 4, the width was 2, and the height was 3. So this is the equation they would start out with. And then they'd go ahead and work it out. They'd say, okay, 4 times 2 is 8. And I haven't used this times 3 yet. And 8 times 3 is 24. So they know my total volume is 24 inches cubed, or 24 cubic inches. Okay? So these are the two ways. You'll notice that base times height is basically the same thing as length times width times height. One step has already just been worked out in their head. Instead of writing the 4 times 2, they just go ahead and write 8 there. So that's what they're doing this week to begin with. Starting Wednesday, we'll move on and we will see figures like this. This is called a composite figure. And all it is we have 2 rectangular prisms that have been put together. And I'm going to teach them how you can cut these figures apart by drawing a line across. And you would find the volume of each figure and then put that together to find the total volume. So they'll learn that you could either cut this figure here, or you could cut this figure here, and they'll be given the freedom to choose which way they want to cut the figure. I'm just going to leave it right here since that's the last way I've drawn it. And they're going to learn how to label these figures to figure out what the length and the width are. So I'm going to call this taller figure, figure A. And I'm going to call this one over here, the side, figure B. And how they'll learn how to work this is for figure A, first they have to figure out what is the length right here because it's not labeled. What would the width be over to the side? Now, the width is not labeled either, but it would be right here because that's how wide it is on the side. And then they're going to have to figure out what the total height is, which is labeled right here. I cannot get that line straight to save my life. Okay, so that 9 is already there for the height, so that's the easy one for them. The challenge is going to be finding what the other lengths are. So let me show you how they would find the length. If I'm trying to find the length right here, well, I know this entire line right here is 10 centimeters, but I just cut part of it off. Okay, so let me look around and see where they're going to find that at. They're going to have to know some information about rectangles and the size of rectangles in order to find this. Let me see where they're going to see it at. Okay, I found it. So if this entire length is 10 and they cut it right here, I can see right here that this is 6. And what is left over that would make up this other side is the length I'm looking for. So if I did 10 minus 6, that gives me this length as being 4. 4 because we said 10 minus 6 is 4 right here. So that's where they would get that from. So now I have my length and my height, which was 9. The only thing they have left to find is the width. And where they would find that, it's over here to the side. This width is 10. And because this side right here is a rectangle, that means this is 10 also. And because this top is a rectangle, that means this is also 10. So they would end up finding out that for figure A, my length times my width times my height, the length was 4 times the height, or times the width was 10 times the height was 9, and then they would solve this. And they'd say, okay, 4 times 10 is 40. And then I have 40 times 9, which is going to be, oh gosh, I'm feeling the pressure with y'all right there. Oh gosh, y'all stress me out. Okay, this is real life. This would happen in front of them too. I know 9 times 3 is 27. And if they wanted to do 9 times 4, all they have to do is add 9 to this. So 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. This is real life, people. So that volume is 36 centimeters cubed. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. Okay, so that would be the volume for figure A. But they're not done. Then they have to go find the volume for figure B. So they found out that this part was 4. And the only thing left over here, this is 6. And that front part is always their length. So we know their length is 6. Okay. Now, the height is over here to the side, but it's not labeled on any of these little edges that would be the height. So how they would find that out is they know this full thing is 9. They know this little part is 4. If I do 9 minus 4, it gives me a height of 5 here. And the last thing to find out is already labeled, which is my width right here. I would break this down slower for them than I am for you parents to find those dimensions that are missing. But I'm going to plug in the formula. My length is 6 times my width is 10. Oops, times my height is 5. And they'd work it out. And they'd say, okay, 6 times 10 is 60. And then they bring down that 5. 60 times 5, well, 6 times 5 is 30. And they know they can add that 0 onto the end. That's going to be 300. But they're not done. So they found the volume of figure A right here. They found the volume of figure B right here. And to find the total volume together, the last step would be add those together. 36 plus 300 equals our total volume of 336 cubic centimeters. Okay, so that's what they're learning this week. It's a lot on your fifth graders' plate, but they like it. They like labeling those composite figures. It feels kind of like a puzzle to them a lot of the times. And then those of them who don't like it, I will be pulling out actual 3D models of these figures so that they can really break it apart and visualize it and get a concrete example in their hands that they hopefully will be able to use to help them. All right, so that's this week. If you have any questions, shoot me a message. I posted on Class Dojo what every night's homework is. We have homework for math Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, just not Friday. So thank you guys so much for caring, for being involved, and I will see you next week. Bye.